Oh look, it's all gone quiet. Well, good afternoon, just everybody. Welcome to the 9th Roy Palmer Lecture, this year given by Margaret Bennett, who we're delighted to welcome. Just for those of you who don't know the background, Roy Palmer died in 2015, and we still remember him as a folklorist and a writer, but above all as an unselfish helper to many researchers and singers. And this series of lectures, of which this is, as I say, the 9th, was set up to honour his memory and to give other researchers a chance to share their knowledge in the same sort of way. So Margaret Bennett is a writer, folklorist, ethnologist, broadcaster and singer, according to Wikipedia, and Scottish to the core. Now, we were in Edinburgh for a TSF meeting some years ago. I didn't bother to look up how long ago it was. And in the evening we had a session in a venue in Edinburgh, and Margaret came in a bit late. And when she came in, the room somehow changed. Everybody suddenly seemed to be smiling. And that's the effect she has on any gathering. I think she's wonderful. I'm not going to say very much more about her. You can read her biography on the Roy Palmer Lecture website, or of course on Wikipedia. But I feel very privileged to have her come here to talk to us today. If only every teacher was as capable and engaging as she is. Very much in the same mould as Roy Palmer. So thank you. We'll look forward to hearing what you have to say, Margaret.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I really do feel honoured to be invited to speak at the Roy Palmer Lecture. I had huge admiration, and probably always, and will always have, for the man himself and his work. Incidentally, as a small aside, if you're looking for biographies, don't use some of those artificial intelligence things as somebody did. I discovered I had a father I didn't know about. And not only that, my mother was American. Well, no, it'll emerge later that, in fact, the two people, anyway, they were both folklorists, so that was encouraging, but neither of my parents were. They were just folk as we are. Roy Palmer was no stranger to Scotland whatsoever. He would come to Scotland, and if we heard he was on the way, we would always try to just get some time with him. But he did the same. He was a prolific letter writer, as you probably know if you knew him. And on this particular occasion, I was sharing a teaching course with the archivist, Alan Bruford, and Roy Palmer is going to be here. We must invite him. So I put up a notice inviting the folk song honours class and anybody else who was interested to come. I noticed they moved us out of the School of Scottish Studies, because those are not the chairs of the School of Scottish Studies. They're in some kind of anonymous building in case we talked about left-wing stuff. Anyway, Hamish was there as he would be, and memorable indeed. For those of you not familiar with the School of Scottish Studies, they didn't ever use the word folklore. It was never a folklore department, and Scottish Studies is a very vague term. Could be anything, geography or anything, but there were reasons for that. Alan Bruford was the archivist, and he was also a full-time lecturer, researcher, a brilliant man, multilingual. And of course Hamish Henderson, who was one of the first people hired, he was hired to collect a Scots tradition, all, not just songs, but everything, stories, and Bruford the same thing. And when Roy would be researching one of his many books, he was always looking for versions of songs, and we could expect him to appear. And this is what he made. I thought I might invite you inside as it was. Lots of filing cabinets and hand-typed index cards, so you could look for versions of this, that and the other. 72 versions of Barbary Allen if you really wanted them all. And 150 wart cures, if that happened to be your taste. And then there were some that weren't classified yet. It's all changed now. They've been digitising, and it's no longer in 3 buildings. Much of it's stored off-site. But some of it, not all, but maybe less than 20% is online. But you can certainly find Roy Palmer online in that archive if you are looking for versions of songs. And this is one that he used in his book, The Rambling Soldier. So just a little piece of it, and I'm not sure if you can that works.
I've got a friend, a girl is she, who'd lay down her life for McCaffrey. Now in old England a soldier dies, in a place called Oldham his body lies. Now all these soldiers who pass this way sing, Lord have mercy on McCaffrey. And who'd you learn it from, Bucky? Oh, Lord, right here in Keith there. Oh, aye. Just hearing him singing. We'll see the Gordons too.
So that's Hamish recording a Bothy man. Was he in the Bothies too? But they do tell you on the website that if you're looking for details about McCafferty, Roy Palmer is your man to go to. And the books are very accessible. His letters to Hamish Henderson are actually in the University of Edinburgh in a special collections, Hamish Henderson collection. I'll just let you see what that looks like. In case you're looking, you can get a box of them out and read them if you're doing a Roy Palmer biography, for example. Anyhow, they're there among other correspondence. It's a huge collection. And I have several at home, which he very kindly wrote to me, and I presume that he has my replies wherever they are. But there was always some warmth and friendship about these letters. He was a tremendous hard worker, I have to say, and that is only a little selection of his books. When I was thinking about this lecture, I was looking at them and thinking, how many of these have touched me? Well, all of the ones I've ever looked at, yes. And I've got little flags in several of them. I go back again and again. Now, what did he say about that? And we have probably quite a different approach to scholarship. I'm a field-working folklorist who goes to the library to see what I can find to support the fieldwork or deny whatever it was. I did probably think along the lines of anthropology to begin with, and then I thought, do you know what? I want to ask the people themselves, what does this mean? I'm not going to sort of make conclusions, my educated conclusion about something I know nothing about, but I'll ask the people themselves. So, if you like, the tools of my trade have always been the tape recorder and that individual interview. There's several thousand of them, I suppose, all for different reasons. And people of all ages. You'll know Belle Stewart here in the middle. And down at the bottom, actually Doc took that photo, if I am not wrong. Kitty MacLeod was the first Gaelic woman ever to appear in a Hollywood movie. The Massacre of Glencoe, and she appeared in Rob Roy as well. And she was a tremendous, a fountain of knowledge. So I thought I have to choose an angle of custom. There's so many customs. I thought, well, I would like to maybe home in on one area of custom that can make the whole thing hold together. But I spent many years recording customs from childbirth to death, and even after 2 or 3 editions of a book on Scottish customs, sometimes the law changes a custom, bans it, or changes it, or makes it politically correct, whereas it wasn't, or brings in health and safety rules. And yet some of our customs have escaped that quite well. Don't believe everything you read about customs. The earliest people to write about them are not necessarily the most knowledgeable. For example, Captain Burt, who was stationed in Inverness in the first part of the 18th century, eventually he had some Hanoverian troops there, And in the barracks he saw a custom which he said, this is a military custom, and he described the soldiers capturing a Scottish soldier and stripping him naked and covering him with tar and feathers and marching him around with a broom instead of a gun. He was going to get married the next day. This is a very strange Scottish custom, and but it is particularly military. No, it's not. He only ever saw it once in the barracks, but it's particularly Scottish. It does make you wonder about these people. Why would you do that? And I've been asking this for years, and I saw one not so long ago, happened to be in Wigton for another occasion, and I saw the car coming down the street with this racket that you probably heard it in Whitby. So I stopped, parked quickly, got out and said, so tell me about all this. Who's the bride? Here she is. And you might say, what's all this about? That's always been my question. Why? And you never necessarily, or you don't necessarily get the right answer from the people who do the custom. I asked a whole audience in Fort William once, how many of you have gone through the blackening? And quite a lot had. Okay. And I asked the audience, I said, so why would you do this? Cover somebody in, well, this is molasses and feed mill molasses and all kinds of dog food, you name it. That's quite a polite one. You should see the others. And one man in Fort William up in you said, well, what kind of a friend would you be that you wouldn't do that for your own friend? So I get quite a lot of curious answers asking, why would you do this? But I keep asking. And I think the only answer I've ever found, which I haven't found it in a book, but I think this might be it. And do they do this in Whitby? No, I thought you had more sense than that. Do they do that in London? No, more sense there too. Well, I'm sorry, that's what we do. I've recorded shepherds who talk about the tar and the sheep dip and you name it. But the only comparison I ever could make was between this and a Hindu custom, when the night before a marriage, the groom would be taken by the bride's father and probably her brothers, stripped naked, covered in oil, and then on the top of the oil, turmeric. So he's bright yellow all over. The opposite of the blackening. And a big contrast, this is what they call white, which is not really white, but it's that colour, is blackened. But then comes the ritual bath, scrubbed head to foot by the brothers and the father-in-law to be, after which he stands up, no, still some more turmeric, back in the bath. This is about the only guarantee that a bride has, or the bride's parents will have, that the man she will marry will be squeaky clean on his wedding night, even if he's been in the sheep dip the day before. And growing up in an area where there was no plumbing and so on, that was quite crucial. Anyway, having spent a long time talking about customs of life and death, and still looking for some answers, I also, of course, we all spend our lives with calendar customs. And we get a calendar every year, all of us, I hope. My uncle, if he opened the calendar and there was no moon on it, he'd say, what kind of a calendar is that? That's useless. Well, he was a poacher. He needed to know when the full moon was. That's true. He was good, though. And then we look for different things, public holidays and so on. I had a naive notion I might like to write a book about Scottish calendar customs. Now, there are several, there are lots, but I'm always a little picky about that and this. I think, well, the challenge in Scotland is this. You can't really start on the 1st of January because you've just sliced the first custom of the year down the middle. We don't really start on the 1st. They're all nodding, they who participate. It's on the 31st of December, the last day. And a lot of these customs well, this is our local village. I stay 3 miles from the village of Comrie in Perthshire, and every Hogmanay, as we call it, and nobody really knows what that word means. They think it's borrowed from French, peut-être, I don't know. They light those very inflammable birch trees, which have been soaking in paraffin since October, and then they've been wrapped in burlap, after which they're then dipped in molten tar. It's a rather large torch, a match that's going to not go out for several hours, and the heat is out. Oh, it's tremendous. So the whole village gathers, and we wait until the countdown, and everybody in the whole village goes 10, 9, etc. And finally, Happy New Year, and the pipe band comes out and they march down the street, and you all stand back. There's no protective clothing worn. The police are there, and it's the only time most of us will go up to the policeman and kiss him and wish him Happy New Year, and he will reciprocate, probably quite pleased.
Fire Brigade? Fire Brigade? Are they there?
Oh.
Sorry, I said
yeah. But there are other customs as well, and you'll find that this is celebrated on Old New Year's. Well, this is on the Murray coast in the village of Burghead. This is probably our oldest one without a break. The flambeau, as they call the one in Comrie, is extremely old, although it's impossible to tell when it began. It was our first article published in the Scots Magazine, which is our oldest journal in Scotland, a popular magazine. It's older than the Woman's Weekly and the People's Friend, you'll know. And in the early 1700s. But then, when this one is older still, and it's prepared and it's very formal. There's a king, the Clavey king. Clavey is from the Gaelic word for basket, but it's actually an old whiskey barrel cut in two with staves, and every year they hammer a nail down the middle. It goes on a pole with some staves so the king can put his shoulder under and carry it on his shoulder. It's another of those customs you think, are these people mad? And they carry this full of, well, it begins with, it's lit with a smouldering peat, and then it's full of tar and pieces of wood that have been soaked in tar and put all kinds of very inflammable stuff, and boomf, up it goes. It's a very thick barrel, and it'll last for several hours. The point of this is to walk it round the boundaries all around the town. It's quite a distance, and then climb to the Drury Hill and set it on a post, or it's actually a hole in the ground that holds the post, and then at that moment throw some more inflammable stuff on it. It's not very ecologically friendly. And it bursts into even more flames, and the flames rush down the hill to the bottom. The only time I went to it to try to do some fieldwork research, I realised after 10 minutes, when my hair was full of tar, I'd have to get a hat. Well, between you and me, the hat, one has to do what you can. It was actually a pair of tights twirled round my head like a turban, and they had to be thrown in the bin. They were covered in molten tar afterwards. It's remarkable. But you certainly get the atmosphere. People come out onto their doorsteps and they wait for a piece of clavey to be delivered to them. And they send it overseas. Parcel to New Zealand. Customs declaration. Piece of clavey. Open it up and there's a stick with burnt pieces on it. Well, the idea is it will bring you good luck for the rest of the year. They used to have smaller ones which were taken round the harbour and round the boats, and the idea for them apparently was they believed that if they managed to, if you like, purify all of the air. Fire often means purification. And for some, they will even articulate burning away evil or burning away the witches, keeping away evil. Keeping away evil was very important. Even in Presbyterian Scotland, which from the mid-16th century, there was quite an emphasis on Well, two things: keeping away evil and then banning customs. But so we're in a bit of confusion here. When I look at those fire festivals, I cannot but think of what we might regard as the Celtic calendar, shared by, of course, Ireland, the Isle of Man, Cornwall, Wales, Galicia, Brittany. When they celebrated the last day of October, the even of the new year, believing that the spirits of the dead would return. Now, I'd read this in anthropological books saying they believed, and then you read the South American customs, etc., all over the world, the Day of the Dead, returning spirits. And I did wonder, I didn't ever hear my own people talk about it, but when the folklorist John Lorne Campbell, who lived in Canada for most of his life, started out his fieldwork times in the island of Barra and the Outer Hebrides. And he happened to be in a house, New Year, and the people went guising on New Year in my mother's day. My mother was born in 1919, so post-World War I. And she said, well, in my day it was just the boys who went. And my grandmother said, we're trying to stop the nonsense they got up to. It was ridiculous. They'd put turnips down your chimney and they would come all over but that mischief seems to be a part. But John Lorne Campbell, they did it both, by the way, at Halloween and New Year. So he was sitting by the fireside of a very old man. He was in his nearly 90. He'd been a fisherman all his life. And he had long since stopped going out for that night. You would open the door to the geysers who could come in. And the rule was, if they guessed who you were, you had to unmask. They might know your hands. My mother knew every pair of hands in Portree. So people wore socks or gloves or shoes on their hands so you wouldn't see them, or blackened. They used blackened cork and other costumes, which you'll see later when we talk about Halloween. But when a group came in, and one was dressed just in old fisherman's clothes, a hat, and he had a kind of a veil thing over his face, an old jersey with holes in it, a pair of rubber boots and oilskins, nothing very spectacular. But the old man by the fire almost fainted. The family thought he was having a heart attack. And they were offering tea. Are you all right? He couldn't speak. He was virtually paralyzed with fear at this geyser who came in. And one by one they were guessing who's this and who's that. And somebody guessed who he was. He was an 18-year-old boy whose grandfather, a fisherman, had died that year. And he just went into the boat shed and he took the old clothes and he thought, that's it, and he went out. And as he walked into this house, he was by the fireside of his grandfather's arch enemy. They hadn't spoken for 65 or more years. And when he came in that night, stomping around like an old fisherman, he nearly, and quite literally, nearly fainted. They thought, so when he saw it was the young fellow, he couldn't put words together. But afterwards he said, what happened to you? Did you have a... No, he said, I thought it was the buttock himself, he said, coming home to get his revenge on me after all those years. He died just a couple of months before. So we have that as evidence, not from afar looking on, but from within. We were very fortunate, I think, in Scotland to have somebody who had the big idea of doing a report for every parish. Sir John Sinclair, who lived in Sutherland, and the statistical account of Scotland. So he asked every minister in Scotland, that is the minister of the kirk, to write about your own parish. What do they do? And he gave a list of questions you asked. Some were more enthusiastic than others, but we know from that, well, they can look. On the evening of October, sorry, it's too small for me to read there. On the evening of the 31st of October, old style, so that's the old not Gregorian but Julian calendar, where there's a 13-day difference. Among many others, one remarkable enough ceremony is observed. Heath, broom, and dressings of flax are tied upon a pole. This faggot is then kindled, and one takes it upon his shoulders, running round, bears it round the village, and a crowd attend. And when the faggot is burnt out, a second one is... This going round the village with a fire on the edge is literally their act of purification. And so you can read pretty well every parish in Scotland and be quite convinced there were a lot of customs. Those customs, they rather divided the year. There was a Halloween at 1 and 6 months later, Beltane, celebrated the night before, and all of them celebrated with fire. We can go back further than that to the writings of Martin from Skye. If I dare say, a kinsman of my own, grand something on my grandmother's side. But more of him anon. And the place names in Scotland also give some things away. We think of the seasons, the quarter days, and our sacred tree is the mountain ash, or rowan. The rowan tree, you'll see them on the streets of Edinburgh, planted, again, to keep away the witches. I asked my mother's brother, who was on his way to church, by the way, and was having a last draw at the end of the house. I said, look at all those rowan trees. They're beside the ruins of houses that people who left for Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia, and the rowans are still there. The houses are gone, the ruins are there. Yes, he said, that's to keep away the witches. And then we went to church. That's a fact. They were very careful. They used the greenery and the different times of year. In the springtime at Beltane, when the blossoms are there, they would often put a sprig of that on the lintel of the stable, or the byre, as we call the cattle or cow place. Do you use the word byre? Anyway, you'll know it. And in the autumn, on the lintel, at the time of Samhain, or All Hallows Eve, Walter Scott describes the drovers driving cattle from the north of Scotland or from the islands, and you could see woven or braided into their tails in the autumn as they headed to the Falkirk Trice or the Crieff market. The oldest one was Crieff. They had little sprigs of rowan, not accidentally caught, but there, so that on the way, the entire way, they would have that, if you like, a token of keeping them safe and protected. This fire at Beltane, I never ever saw it in my childhood, and I didn't meet anybody I knew on the islands. I lived in 3 islands, and from the Isle of Skye we moved to the Isle of Lewis, and then we moved to the Shetlands, which of course is where they have Up Helia, which is more of a revival than people will remember, but it is. But no Beltane fire. However, reading the description of the Western Islands, circa 1695, Martin, in visiting the island of Lewis, he was a tutor to the MacLeods of Dunvegan, and he sailed on a ship all around to write this book, but also to collect rents and to do some trade. They went out as far as St Kilda, where the rent was paid in feathers to be sold to the army for mattresses and pillows. So it was a very interesting economy. But in his description, he writes about, on the island of Lewis, to light the fire at Beltane, they have 9 teams of 9 married men, and in turn they take some sawdust and dry shavings of wood with a drill made from 2 pieces of wood until they get a spark, and they light the fire. I should have mentioned first, that's the only day of the year that the fire in a house is extinguished. If your fire goes out, you have to go to your neighbour to get some fire and carry it to light it again. But everybody extinguished their fire at Beltane. The new season is ahead, the seeds are planted, they want everything to be pure, and this is how they lit the fire. And not only that, they made a cake and everybody got a piece, and then they put one in the fire and took a burnt piece and had everybody draw out a piece of the bannock, and whoever got the burnt piece was told that they would figuratively carry the woes of the community. What a responsibility. But it turns up in other customs as well. And they would also, but it wasn't just fire, and it wasn't just the greenery, the rowans, but it was also water. There were about 800 holy wells, they called them, in Scotland at one time. There's evidence of them still there. Plenty of places, and in Ireland too, and in the Isle of Man the Gaelic in each is from the same root. The word toper means a well, so you get Tobermory, Mary's Well, and so on. And they would visit these wells, and some of them carried on. However, when it came to the time of the Reformation, the Reformed Church thought this was just pagan nonsense, and so they banned the visiting of wells. And we only know that not because the government left us a nice record, but the Kirk Sessions did. If you look, say, in Turriff in the 1600s, there was the baker was called to task for making a special cake, and these women were ordered to kneel on the repentance stool, and the well in Turriff, which was deep, the town well, was ordered to be filled in. But the next Beltane, it was empty again, and there they were going visiting again. What is the power of the wells? We're going to come to them in a moment, because I'll show you a little piece of film. But before I do, there are differences from community to community to community, just as you have in England and Wales and other places. But there's also rivalry. Glasgow, Edinburgh. Oh, good grief. Or take other villages closer in the Highlands. Kingussie and Newtonmore. Oh my word. 3 miles apart. So you'll have your own ones here, I imagine. And we tend to think of that boundary as the edge of the village. So it's a very intricate and woven fabric of complicated, just so many aspects. And then there are isolated communities where they have unique customs, like this one here. That's Perth there. Oh no, that's Creefa. Must have chopped off Perth. Well, never mind. Creef's on the corner there. I live in that wee place called Ochtertyre, and this is the Perthshire Hills. And if you can just look, and there's a little dwelling there, and they call it Tainam Bodach, the house of the old man. And if you go to it, you discover that it's not just a little ruin, there's something else. It's in Glen Lyon, up a little valley off the Glen Lyon. Tainam Bodach means the house of the old man. The larger one with the head, that's the old man. And then there's the old woman, the Cailleach, the old woman. And the other one is the Neon, and there are other stones too. They are the family. And every Halloween, they are lifted and put back into the house. And every Beltane morning, early in the morning, there's a pilgrimage to, one person is appointed to be in charge of this, person who lives in the glen, quite an isolated place, and they bring them out for Beltane. And asking, why do you do that? The response was, well, we've already planted our crops. The potatoes have been planted, the turnip, the cabbage, the kale, the hay is there, and the Cailleach and the Bodach will oversee them. They are the blessing on the plants. Now you might think, well, who are these people? However, I didn't really think much of that because I grew up in Skye, where, although I lived in a very... Actually, my mother's people are Stewarts, and they're a Free Church of Scotland, which is quite a narrow form of Presbyterianism. But they were not by any means without joy. We still had lots of music in the house. But my grandmother did put sixpence in the milk pail so that nobody would steal the good of the milk. She had various other things she did as well, and the rowan, nobody would cut one down. So here, I'll just introduce you to them. Would you like that? I hope you would. That's my grandmother, my grandfather, John Stewart, born in 1801, and my mother, Picky Stewart. And they, of course, there was no electricity when I was a child, so that was possibly why I managed to get in on the edge of many of those customs and the songs. And there was a bard who lived in the village who was, it was a very, my grandfather's house was regarded as what they would call a ceilidh house. At the end of the day, people would come in and sit down, tell stories, sing songs, etc. The stories did change, and so did the songs, after the First World War, when many of them had, well, for example, there was a lot of sadness. He was one of 4 brothers. One joined the Black Watch, one joined the Scots Guards. I should start by saying Black Watch killed at the Somme, the Scots Guards killed at the Battle of Mons, and the 4th one, I can't remember what regiment, but also, so 3 sons out of 4 gone at the end of the war. It makes a huge impact on customs everywhere. And if you were to go to Fife, it's the same story. There were as many Fife Black Watch soldiers lost as there were Highlanders. It makes a huge difference. But they also come back with new ideas or with a new attitude to how they live, and yet they retain much of the old. And so Skye, I was to discover the contrast between islands. Well, there were little differences in Skye too. My family are from the north end, which we call Trotternish. That bit sticking up at the top. Trotternish. And that would be very different to the west side of the island, but they are mutually understandable. And you know that if you were to go to any part of those islands, Hogmanay, the ritual would be more or less the same, and you would soon fit in with it. But when I was 11 years of age, we moved from the Isle of Skye to the Isle of Lewis, the northernmost one, apart from the fact that they spoke with a very different accent to the one that my mother's people and local people there, and they were just different. I thought that moving to Lewis was like moving from this scenic mountainous island to a wet peat on a stone. But then I got to love it very much. It has many, and they had customs there that I never saw in Skye because they'd faded away. They still had, as I was to discover when I was a student in Glasgow, the geography teacher told us all about transhumans, that once was a situation in Scotland where they led the animals to a summer pasture. And I was thinking, they're still doing that. They had shillings, and the shillings lasted well into my lifetime, and some, they're still there now as a little summer, where you took the summer animals. That was the custom every Beltane. But they did celebrate. But the one thing we all did Beltane morning was to bathe in the May Dew. Anybody do that? There you go. Not too many. Lena, where did you bathe in May Dew?
Well, we had, I just watched basically Dew, but one of my daughters come when she's there.
Yes.
She goes in the garden.
Oh yes. Well, I remember my first year away from, I'm one of 4 sisters, and we all went to further education in Glasgow. I stayed in a student residence with 65 girls, and with a very strict house mistress, Miss Ross, being at 10:30. Well, we did find ways around that, but anyway, the last day of April, we were sitting around singing in the common room, and somebody ventured to say, tomorrow's May morning. And we managed to confess that all of us island girls bathed in the May Dew in the morning. It was a great relief to see I was normal. So then we decided, well, let's, they'll never hear us. We'll just get up and tiptoe down the back stairs, out the back kitchen door, and into the garden. It was a rather splendid Victorian mansion, was the residence. No en-suites in those days. And don't bring a friend one step past the bottom stair. So, there we were, on the landing. Maybe about 25 of us in our night dresses, bare feet. Down the stairs we went, onto the lawn, only to discover there was about the same number in night dresses in the next house. And they were all islanders or highlanders, bathing in the May Dew. Why would we go to that trouble? Was it to get up to mischief? Well, no, it was something else. It was that you just didn't want to miss that. It was part of who we are. I've often asked students, and this is classes that quite a number of American students will be there, and I'll say, now if you have to choose just one custom of the whole year that you don't want to miss, you'd go home for that, what would it be? Well, in the old days, most of the Scottish students say, oh, that'd be Hogmanay. Fair enough. One or two said Christmas, but the Americans said Thanksgiving. And the Scots said what? But that changed over the years. So I asked then, how about birthdays? How do you feel if people forget your birthday? Oh, that was a serious crime in some families. And I discussed it with my mother, and she said, you know, Margaret, I don't know when my father and mother's birthdays were. I know the year, but we didn't have birthdays when we were growing up. Well, we did have them in my day because my father grew up in Glasgow of Irish parents. He was from Armagh. And so I have half of me is Irish, at least a bit of me anyway. But they had customs. So I actually put this in a footnote in the book I was writing about the Scots in Canada. And I got a wonderful letter from a woman in Lewis. Dear Margaret, I'm so pleased you said that we didn't celebrate birthdays. That's true, I remember it. Do you know this, she said in the letter. My brother went to London when he was 20 and he was training to be an accountant. And London, can you imagine, after Lewis? And he wasn't there long, he got invited to a 21st birthday party. It was the most amazing celebration. Cards everywhere, happy birthday and a cake. And then they said, oh, it's going to be your 21st soon, isn't it, Callum? And he got terribly worried. Yes, he said, oh, what are you going to do for your birthday? Are your parents coming down? He nearly choked. He'd never heard of a birthday. So he got a 10-shilling note and he wrote a letter to his mother. Dear Mother, I'm enclosing 10 shillings and I would like you to take the bus to Stornoway and buy me a birthday card for my 21st birthday. There's enough for a stamp and the bus fare, and please post it to me in time for my 21st birthday. Well, the letter arrived, the postman spread out crofts and he came in for the cup of tea. He always got a cup of tea from them. And she read, he was having the tea and she read the letter. And in Gaelic she said, what in the world is he going on about? And look at the 10 shillings. Oh, said the postman who knew everything and about postcards especially. I'll read that, he said, and he read it aloud. Oh, he said, and this was all in Gaelic told to me. He said, I know what he means. He's looking for his birth certificate. So she went to Stornoway and went to the trouble of getting a copy of his birth certificate, which she sent to him with a short letter enclosed herewith is your birth, the birth certificate, I think, is what you're wanting, and you're ever loving. Oh, the bit about the weather, of course, and the hens are laying, and we're in our usual. And I remain your loving mother, and her name. And so that was the attitude to birthday. I never ever celebrated a birthday with my grandparents. But it was, so these customs, they do change. They do change. Where are we going? Oh, yes, I know what that was. I'll just go back. I thought the song enthusiasts might like to know that one of the earliest recordings we have from the Isle of Skye is from this man's father, recorded by Marjorie Kennedy Fraser in 1909. So this is what it sounded like. It's not on the back of a tractor, this is a wax cylinder recording. That's probably enough to give you the idea. And it was a recruiting song, a soldier song in the streets of Edinburgh, recruiting. And it's actually clear enough, you can make out the words and transcribe it and sing it. It's still sung. But the person to do the finest recordings of customs was an American who's will be familiar to some of you, especially people with interest in songs, Margaret Fay Shaw, born in 1903 was it, and she was 101 when she died. She has taken the most remarkable photographs of what it was like on the island of South Uist when she went there. And she went there because she had gone to a concert in Pennsylvania, and the concert was given by Marjorie Kennedy Fraser. It was very formal, but the tunes, she just thought they were wonderful. By that time they had pianoforte arrangements, they were sung in English, it didn't matter. She was totally captivated and said, I want to go there and hear these people for myself. So that's what she did, with well equipped with cameras, recorders, what do you call the ones that do films? A cine camera. Anyway, she was going to do everything, and that was also where she met the man she would later marry. He's the one who, on the island of Barra, recording people there, he did the first major recordings of huge collections of Gaelic songs in Nova Scotia. He also did the first Gaelic census in Nova Scotia. Wonderful recordings, both of them. So their big archive is in Canna House. But one of the questions that I had asked, what kind of costumes did you wear at Halloween? And in my day, they had introduced shop-bought masks. People were still making masks, but all the costumes were homemade, and they were secret. Don't tell what you're wearing. But what are you wearing? Tell me. And we would go out and so on. It was a great, exciting night. So what did they wear in South Uist in 1932? Isn't that remarkable? It's quite remarkable. I thought, as late as last night, when I should have been going to bed, I thought, I'm going to phone somebody in South Uist who used to live near Margaret Fay Shaw and ask, can you tell me anything about this photograph? Unfortunately, Zoom was not working, so this is a very bad phone call recording to a man called Paul McCallum, who lived. I said, how far did you live? He wasn't born when she was there, but his mother became the carer of the people with whom Margaret Fay Shaw stayed. And all through his childhood, Margaret Fay Shaw would, or Campbell as she was then, would come from the island of Canna back to the place that had given her this fountain of songs, customs, costumes, you name it. And she always went to see them. And so I said, well, did they ever talk about the oh yes, they talked about the photographs. I said, well, can you tell me anything about who in the world is that? And he pointed, and I wonder if this... Does this photo mean anything to you?
Yes, that's my uncle Norman on Halloween.
My uncle, and he gave me his name. I said, and who's the fellow beside him? Oh, that's my father, with the name. So we're not going back into the Dark Ages, although it might look like it. And she also, now the next, she obviously photographed this in the daylight, but the point being that they would not have gone out in the daylight. She probably got them to come out with their costumes. She would have seen it the previous year and said, I must capture this on film, which she did. And then she asked them to, they would go around the houses, and we never heard the phrase I heard the phrase trick or treat in the 1970s, and I was in Canada. But everybody who went to a house would do a trick, and they would just perform and entertain. And Paul's take on that was, it was certainly one way of making us appreciate our culture and passing it on. Some of them learnt all manner of things, but they danced as well, and it's not a very good rendition of what was her film, but if I can get it to go. I can make out tiny wee bits of it, so I thought, well, I'm going to play it and I'll ask Paul McCallum, what's that song? Going to give us a wee blast of it.
Yes. A few like a king, a few like a king, a few like Smarty Rock, and a few like a king, a few like a king, feel like it's whatever the rest is. I think that's a song. I'm not too sure,
it
but it sounds like it.
Yes, it does. I thought, but actually, he's got one of those bardic memories, and he's a good 10 years younger than I am, so it's not gone yet. So get out there and record some of these things. But the more I think about those customs around Halloween, Beltane, New Year, etc., and I look at what does it all mean, this fire. But what about the water? Well, yes, we did have the thing with the water, the Maydew that I mentioned, but there were still places in Scotland, despite the church pontificating and the banning of it, I think I put the date, yes, in 1555, the Parliament of Scotland decreed that women and others who perturb the peace with merrymaking should be punished, and dancing, singing, and even devotional practices, at holy well, that should be banned. And so on it goes. People were fined for loupen and so on. But nevertheless, eventually, by the turn of the 20th century, the church gave up on them, stopped filling in wells. They said, let them get. And the Baptist church in Inverness had the bright idea, get a busload of people, and then we can use it as a holy celebration of water. And they would go down to the well. There was two of them, one at Culloden, which has a long history of where the soldiers after Culloden would bathe, etc. But what do they do now, said I to myself, when in 1987 went there at 5 o'clock in the morning to see what would happen. And sure enough, even on horseback, they were the posh people. They came too. It's quite a little jaunt to the well in the woods. By this time it was the first Sunday in May. And the English traveller Thomas Pennant describes these wells, tapestried about with rags. There they are, in the adjacent trees. And the well has been enclosed in a little stone enclosure. And there's a ritual they follow. And they've now had a modern addition to the ritual. They put a net in to collect the givings, the offering. You offer to the well a piece of silver or even a piece of metal of any kind. But you take a rag representing an ailment, anything, your backache, your migraines, your stomach ulcer. It's just worth a rag. And the idea is you put in the offering in silence, you self-baptize, and then you dip the rag in and in a prayerful aspect, you take it in silence and you tie it on a tree. That's what will happen to your ailment. And as the rag rots, your ailment will disappear. You have to cross a little stream to get there, so it's not an easy traverse. I probably wouldn't be doing this field work now, so thankfully I did it then. And children who went at that early age went every year. They would be instructed by the family. And here's the grandmother. You'll know the feeling now when you try to get back up again. Mind it. And hang it on a tree. What is it all about? I may come back to that if I can. What's it all about? Well, apparently we lose more work hours and employment time with backache, ulcers, stress. I didn't know the word in my youth. I know it now. And migraines. We have phrases in our language we say, that's just eating away at me. But still it eats away at you. And it will. And so the folk psychology, if I might offer such, is this. Usually if somebody has a problem, they don't entirely keep silent about it. Man flu is worse than women flu, we know that. But they talk about it and meet one another. And this age in my life anyhow, I think, oh dear, here she comes, we'll have an organ recital, I know it. But the idea is a lot of it is emotional, not just a physical pain, but is that confiding in somebody. Jill, do you know what he said to me and that? And can you be... And what I really want her to see is, he what? How dare he? That's awful, and you feel a bit better about that. Unfortunately, that doesn't consistently happen. So if that doesn't happen, you go and you tell some other friend, listen, I'm going to tell you, and till you get somebody... But if you keep doing this, that wound that is there never heals. It's open the whole time. It's open. Are we running short of time? No? Oh, battery. Oh, okay. It eats away. It eats away and eats away. And the way this worked was, you went to the well, and usually you would tell somebody, I'm going to hang the rag there. And if by chance you happen to mention again your friend or close person in your family, you say, you hang it on a tree, it will rot away, and better not to mention it. The less you mention it, the more it will rot away. Really is the principle of forgiveness. I had a discussion with the controversial Bishop of Edinburgh, Richard Holloway, who's written a wonderful book about this. And he points out the very simple thing, it may seem like something religious to you. The reason we forgive is not actually because that person deserves to be forgiven. You forgive for your own sake, to let it go. Let it go. Let it go. And you feel better. Try it. So that's the principle behind the wells. There's another well, and that particular well is more like a tourist attraction, and people go there and they hang all manner of things, and there'll be nylon and rayon which will never rot away, so they're stuck with it all. But not to stay in the Highlands. Every May morning in Edinburgh you will see people climbing to the top of Arthur's Seat. Yes, they'll bathe in the May dew, and that's quite a climb to the top of Arthur's Seat. But now, when you get there, you'll discover that, well, there'll be a minister there, and then he'll do a blessing on the day, and they all sing, morning has broken. And the first time I heard it, I said, what? Well, Eleanor Farton wrote that hymn in 1931. And here we are on the top of it. And not only that, when Cat Stevens got his fantastic hit and multi-million from it, it was to a tune, a Hebridean tune, from the hymn composed by Mary MacDougall of Bonnesson and Mull. There's a lovely little roadside statue to her, a little memorial to her. She made the song a Christmas, one of our very few Christmas carols, and that tune is a very old tune. So it seems totally inappropriate for the top of Arthur's Seat. We got it wrong again. But was it always like that? And where's all this merrymaking they do everywhere else? And we look enviously over the border, and Hamish sends postcards from Padstow, and so does etc. But here is a letter to the, well, actually to the editor of the Everyday book, Hone. So we were talking here about 1836. I have to put in larger letters so that I can read it myself. My dear sir, 1826, allow me without preface to acquaint you with the custom of gathering the Maydew here on the 1st of May, Edinburgh. About 4 o'clock in the morning there's an unusual stir, a great opening of the area gates and a ringing of bells and a gathering of folks of all clans, arrayed in all the colours of the rainbow, and a hurrying of gay throngs of both sexes through the King's Park to Arthur's Seat. In the course of a half an hour, the entire hill is a moving mass of all sorts and sizes. At the summit may be seen a company of bakers and other craftsmen dressed in kilts, dancing around a maypole. In Scotland, I hear you say? Yes, wait for this. On more level part next door is annually an itinerant vendor of whisky. I don't know where they got the E in the word, but never mind. A vendor of whisky or mountain, not Maydew, your approach to whom is always indicated by a number of bodies carelessly lying across your path, not dead but drunk. These proceedings commence with daybreak, and the strong lights thrown upon the various groups by the rising sun give a singularly picturesque effect to the scene, wherein the ever-varying and unceasing sounds of the bagpipes and tabors and fifes et hoc genus omne almost stun the ear. So it's really loud up there. A sort of 1826 rock concert by the sounds. Loud. Drums and everything. About 6 o'clock, the appearance of the gentry toiling and pecking up the ascent become a signal for the serving men and women to march to the right about. For well they know that they must have the house clean and everything in order earlier than usual on May morning. About 8 o'clock, the fun is all over, and by 9 or 10, were it not for the drunkards who are staggering towards the Gedtun, no one would know that anything in particular had taken place. Such, my dear sir, is the gathering of Maydew. I subjoin a sketch of the group of dancers, and he has a little sketch of a maypole, like just near, not at the top of Arthur's Seat, but down in that meadow place that people feed the ducks on now, I believe. So here we have it, proof. Morris dancing in Edinburgh. So what happened to it all? Well, I couldn't help but think, well, okay, maybe that's why Hamish, pretty well every year he possibly could, would go down to Padstow and send back a postcard which says, Margaret, my dear, the sun has risen, and it's a pity that you weren't here, my dear. Us, we always love Hamish. And I had been moved out of the School of Scottish Studies to another building, which I was in the Department of Chinese, which is where my office was. So if you were looking for me, sorry. But the postcard itself, well, nothing daunted. The man himself is in the postcard. Do you see him? He's right on the edge with a hat. That's Hamish Henderson. And that postcard, I remember he would come into some of the classes, and there wasn't a student at Edinburgh who didn't know about this.
You Unite, unite, and let us all unite, for summer is come unto day, and whither we are going, we all shall unite in the merry morning of May. The young men of Padstow, they might if they would, for summer is come unto day. They might have built a ship and gilded it with gold in the merry morning of May. The young women of Padstow, they might if they would.
Well, just in case you're going to think I'm going to do the whole lot, because there's night and day and on to the next morning, I actually eventually went with Hamish in 1996, which is the year I left the School of Scottish Studies. He said, now the first thing you have to do is go to Padstow, which we did, and I drove him. It was an experience you can't really describe. And I would have to say that there's, of course it's got that long history, that there isn't really, or wasn't really, a custom in Scotland that I could say evoked that kind of energy and authenticity. The feeling is that ours have been, across the border, have been very much cleaned up. And if they were full of that kind of joy, well, as I said to the fellow who was picking blackberries on his way home from a walk on Lewis, and the minister overtook him, he said, labouring on the Sabbath? And he said, but the Lord himself picked the ears of corn on the Sabbath. Oh, well, he might have gotten off with that in Palestine, but he wouldn't get off with it here. I grew up, all my teenage years were spent adjacent to a field that had the most colossal number, 4. It was about, at least 15 feet. It was wooden, and it was about maybe, and it was a 4, and you could see this 4 on the horizon because Lewis is flat. You didn't have to get very close till you saw what it was. It was the 4th commandment. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days. Oh, we knew it off by heart. And so that very much influenced our customs that we were inclined to celebrate, but there was plenty of celebrating it. However, from what we read on that letter to Mr. Hone of the Everyday Book, there were dances, and in fact there are a couple of articles in the Folk Music Journal 1936 and 1937 that talk about costumes and bells. But we have to turn to this here. That part that said dancers dressed in kilts, they weren't necessarily what we know now as kilts, but they were kilted garments. But this is from 1633, when the king visited Perth. And as happens when any royal visit, by this time remember we had the union of the crowns, but not the union of the parliaments. But nevertheless, the monarch was coming and they were going to honour King Charles, and here's from the minutes of the book. This is a sword dance, 13 dancers with green caps, silver strings, red ribbons, white shoes and bells. I think there's about 251 bells on this costume, on the legs, and it has been restored. It's in the New Perth Museum. You can see it for yourself, and they certainly dance. Yes, 252 bells. That would make quite a noise, wouldn't it? And 13 of them danced together, and describes a rapper dance. They had swords, and how they danced. The dance is described, and that's the restoration of the costume and so on. And they have even, the Borders Piper Society has even traced a tune. I'm going to end up as fast as I ever can by telling you that is not the end of the story on Beltane. In 1987, this man here, who was based in London, a Scot, and member of that loud industrial band called Test Department, it's probably not Granny's taste, came to the School of Scottish Studies because he had heard that they used to be great, and he'd seen festivities in Spain and he knew how to make loud noise. Would we help him celebrate Beltane in Edinburgh? So Hamish and I agreed that we would, and it was quite remarkable. They had a May Queen. It became a huge piece of theatre, and a few slides from the time. It wasn't on Arthur's Seat because they didn't get permission from the owners of Holyrood Palace. The Crown didn't give permission to hold this, but you could climb Arthur's Seat as always. But this was on Calton Hill, up beside that folly, and the dancing was quite remarkable. It was a huge success. There were about 300 people there. We brought all our students, and we stayed there till 4 in the morning when we all went to the top of Arthur's Seat. And there was lots of music. And then we got a letter the following year, we're going to do this again, by which time they'd recruited a little bit of funding. And this is, so will you come again, dear Margaret and Martin, will you come again and play the music and bring some musicians? Well, we did. We even had a child ballad sung by the guy who, the harmonica player on...
Who's gonna shoe your pretty little feet? Who's gonna glove your hand? Who's gonna kiss your red ruby lips? And who's gonna be your man? Your papa gonna shoe your pretty little feet. Mama gonna glove your hand. Sister gonna kiss your red ruby lips. And I'm gonna be your man.
He's the guy who did the harmonica on City of New Orleans. He was in Edinburgh at the time, and we invited him for a great fee of nothing. A bed for the night, as you did in those days. So 10 years later, which it was still going, I might be able to show you what it looked like 10 years later. Yes, I will. It's now ticketed. Completely ticketed.
With the red men. And that's sort of
people fly from Australia to go to this, to be a red man. Why?
It's really sad.
It's obviously a festival of fertility. I see the fire as a ritual to do with purification. So it's to celebrate the start of spring. The beginning is very spiritual. And all the performers, before they take part, very much recognise that quality, and that's very important to the performance. You may not think it now in terms of the debauchery, but I'm no longer virginal maiden.
At the end, we all intermingle with the red men, and that sort of symbolises the beginning of summer and fertility and all that sort of stuff.
So far no Scottish accents, but there you go, on it goes.
We represent the forces of chaos. We represent the forces of chaos, evil and winter. The white women represent summer, and we, the red men, are trying to stop the onset of summer and the onset of purity by trying to force our partying onto the white women. But we're not successful, but we try, because that's us, red men.
I think it's just wonderful to have some ritual back in our life, but so much has gone, and it's just tremendous to have so many people. It's grown so much over the years. Tonight apparently there was about 10,000 people. The killing of the Green Man is very important because we transition from winter to summer. At that point, winter is no longer with us and summer has arrived, and we have a human embodiment. We have a right to show that physically, and so now for everybody it's summer.
It's a huge piece of drama with fairly naked performers.
We killed him. We stripped him of his wicker dress, which was more like a dress, and we helped him his rebirth and passage from winter into summer. That's what we were doing. It's very wild. We believe in the power of ritual, and I mean, everybody has their own ideas about what Beltane is.
For most people, I'd say for virtually everybody, it is very much spiritual, and not just spiritual, but a celebration. Okay, it's very artistic and very dramatic, but that just makes it more exciting.
And they wear fewer and fewer garments, believing that's what Hebridean people did for Beltane. Well, no, I wouldn't go out without my vest at that time of year.
Evil and winter.
I talked to the man who began it.
I think the aim was not to do something which was a copy of the past, because you have to do things for your own time. So it's very much take the spirit of what happened in the past, but do it with your own culture and your own way of doing things. But the spirit, the roots of it, for those who know, are still very, very close to the original spirit of Beltane. That's obviously why it's worked, because if it didn't have that, you wouldn't have 4,000 people out in the hills celebrating. I would like to see Beltane running all over Scotland.
And he said, well, it's about people needing to celebrate. And I think it is. We live very stressed and humdrum lives and long to celebrate something. Let's see if I can. And there we are. They now, as I say, ticketed 10,000 people every year.
For most people, I'd say for virtually everybody, it is very much spiritual, and not just spiritual, but a celebration. Okay, it's very artistic and very dramatic, but that just makes it more exciting. It's not what it's about. Nobody would do this for no money, if and the amount of work that it requires, the amount of energy.
So all these issues come up, and they leave them behind for Beltane. And then the next day back to normal. We share a lot of these customs with from the Isle of Man, for example. But when I start off in that island I came from, I'm going to end up in Whitby and Hull. And one last little thing. I happen to be reading, thanks to, where's Pete? This was in Jock Duncan's collection of books, and I've enjoyed it immensely. The surgeon who joined a whaling fleet, 1830, and this is it. He left Hull in an atmosphere of excitement and high hopes for a good season. Crowds of people lined the harbour exit to cheer them off, most ships with them carrying with them garlands of ribbons made by the wives and sweethearts to be hoisted on mainmast far away in the Arctic to celebrate May Day. And there they were tattered and stayed there till they came home. This from a land from Fife, but he joined the ship, and he also sailed out of Whitby. But that deep, deep connection to custom, I think, is still important to all of us. And thank you for listening.
Margaret, that was absolutely marvellous. So much to think about. We're very short of time, but I think we could manage 2 short questions. Has anyone got anything they'd particularly like to ask? Or has she stunned you completely? Oh. Okay. Looks like you haven't.
Do you have any questions, Martin? No?
No.
Well, you're all invited to Edinburgh next April the 31st, and you can get up to the hill and you'll enjoy it like the rest. I've been to quite a number of them. Last time I went to, I got kidnapped. That's true. That's true. Gonzalo didn't know where I was. I disappeared for the whole night because they came and literally lifted me up and ran away with me.
Is that custom as well, Margaret?
No. Somebody said, that's the woman who short of saying it's all her fault, it wasn't, but it's quite amazing. Every Beltane I get invited somewhere to, will you please come and be with us for Beltane? And I can do less and less of it now as age takes over, but the memories are great, and I think that urge to celebrate is maybe part of all of us, and to sing. There are songs that now are a big part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Margaret, for talking to us today. I hope we'll be back here next year for the 10th Roy Palmer Lecture. I don't know who it's going to be yet, but I've had a few ideas, so some arrangements need to be made. Be here, and we'll see how we go. And thanks again to Margaret.